So today we're going to be looking at the Sith Rule of Two Master and Apprentice relationship. So the symbiosis there in that Master-Apprentice relationship. How does that function? How does that work? And now that we've done the video on corruption, go and watch that first because that'll make this make a lot more sense. But now we've done the video on corruption, we can get into the actual mechanics of being a Master and Apprentice and how that works. So if you recall from the corruption vid, the dark side is not inherently living force based. It is cosmic force based, and it's corruption of the living force. Again, done a video on that, how all that works, so go check that if you want an in-depth analysis of that. But essentially, the dark side lies in the cosmic force, which is inherently within, and the living force, that's what the Jedi rely on. That's the force around. That's the big web of life created by all living things, and that's what the Jedi use more so than the cosmic, obviously the dark side of that. So the goal for a Master, the ultimate goal for a Master, is to corrupt an Apprentice. And you want to corrupt an Apprentice with a strong living force connection, because as I talked about in the last video, the stronger the living force connection, the more corruption of the force you're going to achieve by corrupting an Apprentice. And much like the living force, which is one giant web, it's force bonds, the dark side is inward thinking and selfish, and living, the light side is outward thinking, living force, selfless. But living force is still force bonds, right? Everyone's bonded together, and how close you are bonded to all different things is, how powerful you are, different threads that cross your force presence, whatnot. But it's the same idea for the Sith, but it's a different type of force bond, you see, because they're not bonding with external emotions, they're bonding with internal emotions, they're bonding with the dark side. Instead of drawing your power through the force bonds, the living force, where you have, you share those connections, you share happy moments, you share love, compassion, all of that sort of stuff. With the dark side, they're simply bonded through their shared hatred, their shared selfish desires. And of course,
To be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best.
That's all from within. They're all bonded from within, instead of from without. And corruption, in that sense, corruption on the dark side, it's going to break those bonds around you. It's going to corrupt them and it's going to break them. So you're going to lose, obviously, your connections, you're going to lose your relationships. It's all a metaphor for that. Then, of course, all you've got is yourself then. So it is an endless loop. So if you haven't watched the last video, we're going to be calling corrupted living force, so dark side living force, and we're just going to be calling that dying force, just to separate it from the cosmic dark side, so we know which one we're speaking about. And so the dying force, it says it in the name, right? You're going to die. It's death. That's what the dark side is. So how do they stay alive? What is that function, that symbiosis that keeps them going? How do they mutually benefit each other? And we're told in the Tarkin novel by James Luceno that the dark side requires bait and a vessel.
In the intervening years, he had actually come to appreciate Plagueis for the planner and prophet he had been. Such perilous machinations required two Sith, one to serve as bait for the dark side, the other to be the vessel. Success would grant them the power to harness the full powers of the dark side and allow them to rule for 10,000 years.
So that vessel is the cosmic force, right? That's the master. That's the master of the dark side and the cosmic force. And the bait, remember we talked about corruption in the last video, living force, a strong living force presence to corrupt. Well, the bait is that living force presence, and that's the apprentice. That strong presence to corrupt. But of course, the dark side is death, right? So the longer the master's around, during his masterhood, he's losing life, right? His living force is dying the whole time. He's getting more and more corrupted. So by the time he's gone to get his new apprentice, his living force presence is withered away. He's at the end of the cycle, and he needs something to restore that living force presence and to keep him alive, because darkseid is inherently death. So he's reached the end of the cycle, so now he needs an apprentice. And the purpose of that is not just to corrupt the force as much as possible, like we talked about in the last video, but corrupt the apprentice to draw power off of. And when I say drawing power, I mean specifically in the context of healing oneself. So keeping oneself alive and regenerating. And this is what we see Palpatine do in Rise of Skywalker.
The life force of your bond.
Obviously the circumstances are different, he's drawing that life force from the dyad bond instead of, from an apprentice, but it's the same thing happening there. It's him regenerating his decayed form, and that's the goal there. with having the apprentice. And obviously with this relationship, it's like a bond thing. So he's not actually draining it physically. Like, you won't see, he's not like every now and again looking at his apprentice and going and like draining him. It's just like a passive thing that happens through their bond. And the flesh is of the living, right? So the dark side doesn't work well with flesh, so it's always going to be corrupting and trying to destroy that physical form. And it's from the apprentice, that bait, that living force bait, that you keep a living force connection, because eventually as a master that's going to wither away and die. So you keep a living force connection through drawing it from your apprentice, who obviously is less corrupted, has had less degradation than the master at this point. And it's exactly how we see Talzin in The Disappeared, try and steal a living force connection to be able to manifest physically.
I am not a natural force wielder like the Jedi or Sith. I use dark magic to achieve power. But as a Bartoti, you possess a strong connection to the living force. A connection that will now be mine.
Never. I will not succumb to your evil.
It's the exact same idea with Sith, right? I mean, if you die, if you've got no living force presence, all you've then got is a cosmic force presence, which is no different to what the Night Sisters are, basically. They're just illusions of the cosmic force. And that's all a Sith spirit is.
Your power is no match for my magic.
Magic is only an illusion.
You know, Night Sister's power comes from the dark side. It's a part of the dark side, and that is cosmic force. Which, you know, we see this with the spirits on the Moraband in Season 6 and with Bane.
Dead you are already.
Then what stands before you?
An illusion. Real you are not.
You do not fear me.
No. Exist you do not anymore.
And that's what a Sith ultimately becomes if he doesn't, you know, get an apprentice and keep a living force connection. And that's the problem with the Sith, is always trying to keep that living force connection to stay alive. Because staying alive in a cosmic sense, as a spirit, that's not what everyone's after, right? People want to stay alive in a physical sense. And they can do this through this master and apprentice relationship. Functions of which obviously still apply to Sith prior to Bane, but it was Bane who sort of perfected this system in the Rule of Two. Which, you know, leads into issues there about like dark side dilution in the Old Republic and stuff like that, which I will do videos on explaining all in depth at some point. That's what I'm liking about these little mechanic videos, is they'll build off one another. So after you've watched this, others will make more sense, and you can sort of build up the functions from there and build a picture of how all this works. So back to the Night Sister thing. So it's essentially exactly the same thing with Queen Julia and Talzin as it is with Sheev and Anakin.
A connection that will now be mine.
And the StarWars.com Disappeared rewatch actually confirms this. Says that much like Darth Sidious seeks to use Anakin Skywalker's powerful connection to the Force for his own dark deeds, the Great Mother is willing to sacrifice the Queen Julia. So it's all just a gig to harvest living force power. Because without that living force aspect, the dark side is no different to Night Sister magic. You know, it's just an illusion. That's why Yoda can cast away his dark side by just rejecting it.
The power over me you have not. My dark side you are. Reject you I do.
Because fear is the dark side, like the priestesses say, and fear is an illusion. Obviously the fear is the one priestess that doesn't have a face, doesn't have a form.
What in your existence some call evil, otherwise known as fear.
Or rather, the one emotion that doesn't have a priestess. That's really all the dark side is, it's an illusion, but Sith make the dark side live, and that's through corruption. So the apprentice's role is to provide that living force aspect to the master-apprentice relationship, to sustain the master's body and physical form with living force, to keep them alive. That's how the master uses the apprentice, that's how the master draws off the apprentice. And the other way around, of course, you have a force bond with your master, through which you absorb the Sith power line, and slowly inherit that lineage, that line you stem from. And that's how you draw power from your master. So that's how you learn knowledge and mastery, is through your force bond is a sort of gateway into their cosmic connection.
There was a link between the two of them, a bond established through their time together studying the Force. A connection between mentor and student
and they reveal small amounts, which are then fed into the apprentice's living force connection, which then corrupts it more and more. And every single lesson is, a bit more corruption in a sense. So you get the apprentice feeding knowledge and power from the master. And the apprentice explicitly doesn't have the power, right? The apprentice craves the power. The master has the power. The master embodies the power. The apprentice craves it.
2 there should be, no more, no less. One to embody the power, the other to crave it.
The greater goal of the Sith involved toppling the Force itself and becoming the embodiment of the galaxy's animating principle.
So you've got the master to embody the cosmic force, right? You've got the master to embody the dark side, and you've got the apprentice to crave that power. So the apprentice is the living force component there, who craves to embody the power. But to embody the power, right, if you embody the dark side, you have to be the complete opposite of living force, right? You have to be dead, essentially. That's what Sith are, essentially. They're like zombies. If the dark side is death, the opposite of living, then obviously the embodiment of the dark side can't be anything living at all. So the only thing animating that body, keeping them in a physical form, is what they can draw off their apprentice. Once they get really down there in the descent and get past that certain point. So the goal for the apprentice is eventually to learn everything he can from the master through that force bond, absorb everything he can, which involves like corrupting himself as much as possible, with the masters, with the cosmic dark side, corrupting that living force as much as possible.
But if the Sith numbered exactly 2, minions and servants could be drawn into the service of the dark side by the temptation of power. They could be given small tastes of what it offered, as an owner might share morsels from the table with his faithful curs.
So the apprentice doesn't have the power, right? He craves that cosmic power, but the goal of a master is to find an apprentice who is as strong as him. So he doesn't have that power, he doesn't have that cosmic power, he doesn't embody the dark side, obviously. But in terms of living force, the apprentice should be at least, as strong as the master. So obviously, so the Sith can progress. So the goal is to just keep corrupting stronger and stronger living force presences with the power of the dark side and the cosmic force, essentially. So you're a Sith apprentice, right? And you get taken under tutelage of this master. He's chosen you because your living force presence is as strong or stronger than his. Then you form a force bond with your master through those same internal, within emotions and motivations. Then you crave his power that he's feeding to you bit by bit. And as that happens, your living force presence becomes corrupted. And as that happens, you grow stronger, because obviously dying force, as we're calling it, is stronger than living force, because it's the dark side is stronger. All the while, the master is sustaining himself on that power, on your living force presence, so he's not completely dead. Because after living force presence is corrupted, it becomes dying force, but then after it's dying force for a while, the more corrupted you get, that's when living force starts to, or even dying force, it starts to die off and you don't have anything left. So that's what eventually happens with the master, and that's why he needs to sustain it with his apprentice. And that's what we see with Return of the Jedi Palpatine and Vader. The Emperor's physically started to wither away and cripple. Living force can become dying force for a while, but after a while that's going to just die. So that's what needs to be sustained. So the apprentice, naturally having that, being that more living force component of the duo, they usually take up that role as the physical aspect. You see this with Darth Maul and Darth Sidious in The Phantom Menace. You see it with Dooku and Sidious in Attack of the Clones. You see it with Vader and Sidious in Revenge of the Sith, all through the original trilogy. Vader's like the Emperor's fist. Loads of sources talk about this, stuff like Battle Games. Insider talks about how Darth Maul is the physical side of Sidious. Why does he need to fight when he's got an apprentice? Which also means the apprentice take up largely those sort of living force-based abilities, and the master the cosmic sort of based abilities. Again, this is shown with Maul and Palpatine. He's the physical force, the living force side of Sidious, of that duo, and that's shown in, obviously, with him being a better fighter, and with him, in the draft for Phantom Menace, he actually senses the Jedi's presence, the Jedi's living force presence, before Sidious is able to, quite a while before Sidious is able to as well. Which is why, quickly, when people talk about power in Star Wars, it can't really be applied as such a blanket statement, because there's so many factors going into power. Obviously, I will get into stuff like that in future videos, power levels and shit like that. The apprentice probably could beat the master pretty early on in a fight, because they are better with the living force, and they are more physically focused as an apprentice, you know, before all that deep corruption and dying off of living and dying force starts to happen. But it's more to do with the mental hold the master has over the apprentice, because they've got that bond, right? And that is also a mental hold, and fear is the component in that. Usually the apprentice is locked sort of below his master. In a sense, he's unable to beat him because of that fear factor he has for him, and the fact that obviously he doesn't want to kill him yet because he wants to learn everything. But as soon as that fear is gone is usually when the apprentice can overthrow the master. And you know, it's the same idea that's shown with Yoda in the Yoda arc, where, you know, as soon as he gets rid of his fear of the dark side, it stops having power over him. The master stops having power over the apprentice as soon as that fear is gone. And that's why, you know, the zombie cosmic force component to the duo doesn't just get instantly like killed by the strong, fit, young, living force component there. I mean, he's not a zombie. You get what I mean. He's not a zombie because he's regenerating himself on the apprentice, but he's only regenerating himself to what his body is physically capable of augmenting, which gets, you know, lesser and lesser with the more corruption. And obviously, if the apprentice was aware of the apprentice, he's going to be capable of augmenting more. He's going to have a higher capacity for that. But obviously, with the more corruption on both parties, if you let it get too late to the point where both parties start to, you know, die off, well, that's why the Sith need to be constantly, you know, fighting each other. That's why the Sith are constantly at war. They need to be constantly progressing. Otherwise, they are just going to die out. Because, you know, their power is death. But yeah, the apprentice still needs to absorb all that power from the master before he should obviously overthrow him. And that's an issue there with Sith progression. I will do more videos on that, but obviously that doesn't always happen. There are flaws in the system. Even in the Rule of Two system, there are some flaws. I'll go over stuff like this in another video because it's dead complicated, but still needs to absorb all that power. And whenever he's ready. You know, if he kills him, fair game. Because, I mean, if he's chosen to be an apprentice in the first place, in this Rule of Two line, then he's fit for the job, but it's a mastery thing, both physically and mentally. And, you know, it's a corruption thing. But eventually, you know, the apprentice, you know, kills the master, and then the master's dark side energies, you know, obviously we talked about this in the last video, they're not replenished into the cosmic force, they're not renewed into any sort of symbiosis, so those energies go to chaos, which is then wielded by the apprentice. So those master's energies after his death are then wielded by the apprentice, which is why we see big dark side boosts, you know, when Sidious kills Plagueis, or when you know, when Dooku dies, Palpatine gets stronger, stuff like that. And that's because their spirit becomes part of the well of energy that what is the dark side. And you can actually hear all the voices of all the past Sith when they anoint the new Dark Lord. So you hear with when Sidious kills Plagueis.
But the moment didn't constitute an ending so much as a true beginning, long overdue. It was less a transformation than an intensification, a gravitic shift. A welter of voices near and far, present and from eons past, drowned his thoughts. Raised in praise, the voices proclaimed his reign and cheered the inauguration of a new order. Yellow eyes lifted to the night sky, he saw the trembling stars flare, and in the depth of his being, he felt the power of the dark side anoint him.
You know, that's all the Sith imbuing themselves in Palpatine, which is why we get lines like,
"You want to kill me? That is what I want. Kill me, and my spirit will pass into you, as all the Sith live in me."
Obviously he wants to die so he can pass on all the Sith to a new host, which is essentially what it is in the end. It's a big hive mind, and it's a parasite. Festering, growing, corrupting. That's what the Sith are, that's what the dark side is. It's a disease, it's a parasite that just grows, festers, corrupts, and just passes it all on to a new host all throughout history. So it just keeps getting worse and worse. Obviously, we see the same concept in Revenge of the Sith and in Return of the Jedi. And I'll do a separate video on that entirely. I know people have been wanting to see that. Mechanics about chaos and the build-up of spirits there. I'll get into that in a future video. But the apprentice can only wield those master's energies if he's mastered those same energies entirely. You know, through his force bond with his master. And then he'll be that strong, right? He'll be in his prime by then. So then he needs to find an apprentice who's naturally as strong as him in the living force to pass on all of that power. So you can see how big the power progression is there. And you can simply tell that by looking at the mechanics of the relationship between Master and Sith and the functions of the Force that surround it. And the Force actually spawns these like continually stronger beings which allow this progression. The Force does it.
The Force provides, Sidious.
As nature provides more male beings in the aftermath of war, the Force, ever mindful of balance, provides beings strong in the dark side when light has ruled for too long. This Zabrak bodes well.
But that's a whole different topic. I'll do another video on that at some point. But what Clone Wars Season 6 essentially shows us is that Sith and Night Sisters are almost exactly alike. Both of their power coming from the Cosmic Force. And the difference being that Sith, of course, are living things. They are like living before they corrupt themselves with the dark side and become what is essentially a Night Sister. So that living force component there, that apprentice, is key to ultimately not ending up like a Night Sister, which is essentially just a Sith spirit, which, you know, you're dead at that point. And it's just another, you know, symbiont circle, you know, symbiosis that the Sith share. And, you know, that's how their powers being death, you know, that's how they can stay alive. So yeah, that's the Master and Apprentice relationship that we see used in the prequels. That's the Master and Apprentice relationship of the Bay Knight line, so the Bay Knight Sith line.
In the end, however, there could be only one true Sith Master. And to serve this Master, there could be only one true apprentice. Two there should be, no more, no less.